Tonight, we are not exploring the thoughts of a philosopher. Instead, we are stepping onto a battlefield. But this is not the kind you see in movies with carefully planned duels, slow-motion cavalry charges, or perfectly shining armor. No, tonight we will experience the raw reality. The mud, the confusion, the panic, the sweat, and the cold steel. This is what truly happened in a medieval battle, and it was nothing like what you see on screen. So, before we begin, please feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content I create here. I would also love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It is always so interesting to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft, steady sound, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You awaken to a sound that is somewhere between a harsh horn and a man shouting the word, "March!" There is no snooze button here. There is no comfortable bed. Only the damp, cold ground and the deep ache of having slept in your armor. You try to stretch but immediately regret it. Your chain mail feels like it has become a part of your body, clinging to you. Around you, a dozen other soldiers are waking up, all with the same look of regret and discomfort. One man is still asleep, his head resting on a helmet filled with rainwater. Another is trying to get a slug out of his boot with a dagger. You are not sure if you should try to eat breakfast or just apologize to your stomach in advance. Breakfast, by the way, is what you might call a historical disappointment. It is a piece of bread so hard it could probably deflect an arrow, possibly baked during the last holiday. You chew slowly, not because you enjoy it, but because your jaw still aches from yesterday's meal, which had meat of a questionable source and something that might have once been a vegetable. You wash it down with warm ale because drinking medieval water was a risky game. There is no time for grooming, not that it would make a difference. You have not seen your own face in weeks, and frankly, that is probably for the best. You splash a handful of murky water on your face to feel clean. Then you strap on your gear, which smells of old fear. Then the orders are shouted. Form up. Move out. Yelled by an officer on horseback who clearly has not walked a mile in his life. The army begins to move. Men grumble, armor clanks, and someone is already limping because they stepped on a sharp rock with a bare foot. The mud pulls at your boots as if it is trying to take your very soul. You have not even seen the enemy yet, and you are already exhausted, damp, hungry, and regretting every choice that led you here. And the worst part? This is considered one of the good mornings. The command is given, march. And so you do, not because you want to, but because the alternative is staying behind and being called a deserter, which usually ends badly. So you walk forward one muddy, miserable step at a time. The ground is more like wet despair than earth. Mud is a constant, but this is a special kind of mud. It pulls at your boots as if it is trying to steal your soul, or at least your left shoe. You pause to adjust a strap and immediately fall behind, getting angry looks from the man behind you. Armor, it turns out, was not designed for long walks, clanks, pinches, and it rubs in places you did not know you had skin. Your shoulders ache with a dull pain, your thighs burn with every step, and your inner thighs are not happy with you. You are, in a way, a walking iron can slowly cooking in your own sweat. The air is a strong mix of animal smells, cheap onions, and primal fear. Someone ahead lets out a sound that suggests they had a bad reaction to last night's turnip stew. You try to breathe through your mouth, but immediately regret that choice as well. You pass a broken cart and what might be a human toe. No one stops. Stopping is for people who enjoy being yelled at. The sergeant yells anyway, he never stops. It is his whole personality now. Morale is completely gone. Some men try to sing war songs to feel better. Others mutter desperate prayers. One guy in the back just screams into the wind. No one tells him to stop. Honestly, it seems to be helping. At one point, you think, maybe the enemy will give up before we even get there. Then you remember they are probably thinking the same thing, which means this will inevitably end with someone panicking, everyone frantically fighting, and you trying to remember which end of the spear is the pointy one. After what feels like forever, a hill appears. Of course, it does. Every single medieval battle seems to happen on top of a ridiculously steep hill. As you begin the difficult climb, someone slips and tumbles back down. No one helps him. He is honestly better off now. And still, you march. Eventually, you arrive at the designated place where you will definitely not be sleeping tonight. The battle camp. It is less a functional base and more of an organized mess. There are tents, of course, if you are a noble. The rest of you get a patch of mud that is slightly less cursed than the area around it. You claim your spot by simply collapsing on the ground and calling it a bed. Your neighbor does the same thing. Congratulations, you have started a trench community. The smell hits you next. A terrible mix of wet wool, unwashed bodies, old boots, and whatever strange substance is rotting near the food cart. There is a constant buzz in the air, not of excitement, but of flies, thousands of them. You have even started naming some of them. You have made peace with that grim fact. Then there is the latrine, which is just a shallow hole in the ground, full of regret. Privacy, there is none. The smell is biblical. You try very hard not to make eye contact with anyone during your visit. Everyone's dignity has long since disappeared. You are handed a bowl of stew. It is definitely gray. That is its only noticeable flavor, gray. You ask what is in it, and the cook just stares at you for 5 uncomfortable seconds before silently walking away. You eat it anyway because you are starving, and you really hope whatever meat is in there did not have a name 2 hours ago. Some men are sharpening their weapons with serious determination. Others are gambling with dice. A few are praying very loudly, not necessarily because they are devout, but to make sure everyone sees them praying, just in case God is giving extra protection to the more dramatic ones. Then there are the sounds. Hacking coughs, distant, sad weeping, a man singing terribly off-key about bread, and somewhere, someone trying to play a lute as if it were a weapon. You hear a knight shout an order. He is perfectly clean and smells faintly of lavender. You instantly dislike him. Night falls. You curl up tightly in your damp cloak, lying next to a comrade who snores like a donkey having a seizure. You try to sleep, but your mind is too busy imagining all the different ways you could die tomorrow, or even tonight, if that persistent goat kicks you in the ribs again. And as you finally start to drift off, a voice shouts from the distance, "Form up at sunrise." Great. Another beautiful morning awaits. Dawn breaks, and with it comes the cold realization that you are probably going to die in a field very soon, possibly before lunch. You have not even brushed your teeth. Not that you have a toothbrush or any teeth worth saving. Trumpets sound, a noise that makes men groan. You slowly crawl out of your damp, lice-infested wool blanket to find your comrades already trying to look motivated. You line up because standing in orderly rows somehow makes people feel a little more in control of their coming doom. It is a complete lie, but it is one you can shuffle into with numb feet and a very nervous stomach. And then he appears, the noble commander, a man in polished armor so clean it practically glows. He has that strange aura that only people who have never been truly punched in the face seem to have. He looks over the assembled troops like a very disappointed parent who just found out you were in a tavern brawl. He clears his throat. Everyone gets ready. It begins. Men, today we fight for glory. He pauses for dramatic effect. Someone near you coughs up something that might be alive. For our king, our lands, our honor. The crowd murmurs, mostly from stomach pain. Definitely not patriotism. Look to your brothers. Look to your steel. You look to your side. The man next to you is visibly shaking and has his helmet on backward. His steel is noticeably bent. The enemy fears us. They probably do not. They are likely listening to their own general yelling the same thing, just in a different language. If you die today, oh good, the cheerful part. You die as heroes. You hold back the strong urge to raise your hand and ask, "Can I die later? Maybe as a baker." Then comes the required part about God. God is on your side. This is somewhat comforting, except you are pretty sure God has been busy punishing everyone equally this whole season. The speech ends with a dramatic sword thrust into the air and a loud shout of, "Forward!" No one moves. A few guys blink. One guy sneezes. The shouting continues until someone finally shuffles forward, and the rest reluctantly follow. Not out of strong belief, mind you, mostly because standing still means the commander might pick you for a volunteer. job, and you have heard what happened to the last volunteer. Thus ends the pep talk. You are now spiritually ready to panic with a single purpose. So now it is time to form ranks. A fancy phrase that brings up images of precision, discipline, and strategic order. What you actually get is a very confused group of people vaguely facing the same direction, half of whom are still trying to put on their helmets properly. Some are holding weapons they just picked up 5 minutes ago. One guy is holding a pitchfork. You are pretty sure he is just here by accident. Your sergeant, who was probably a pig farmer 3 years ago, starts shouting numbers. No one knows what they mean, but everyone nods as if they understand perfectly. Front line, shield wall, he screams. Second line, pikes forward. You follow his instructions, even though the man in front of you has his shield upside down and is using it to scratch his back. To your left is a guy with a spear twice his height who keeps accidentally poking people. To your right is a man humming a battle hymn that might just be Greensleeves, with different words. Directly behind you is someone breathing so intensely it sounds like they are practicing dying noises in advance. You suspect he might not even be hurt, just mentally preparing. The cavalry is off to one side, horses pawing the ground dramatically, knights sitting tall and perfect in full plate armor that cost more than your entire village. They look majestic. You, meanwhile, are standing in borrowed boots and chain mail that smells like someone died in it, probably because someone did. There is a sudden order to move forward and tighten the line. This is much easier said than done when every other man is stepping on someone else's foot, and the mud is threatening to swallow small soldiers. Your feet slide. Someone elbows you. Your shield is now inexplicably backward, and you just do not have the emotional energy to fix it. Then comes the steady drumbeat. A slow, ominous sound that tells everyone the battle is about to begin. Men start whispering prayers. One man begins to cry quietly. You pretend not to notice, mostly because you are too busy making your own peace with your imminent death. You take a deep breath, raise your weapon, and try very hard not to pass out. This is it. You are ready. Well, as ready as anyone in a crooked line of terrified peasants can ever be. Just when the formation starts to look somewhat believable, meaning no one is actively marching in the wrong direction, the sky itself turns against you. It begins with a sound, a soft, distant whoosh that quickly grows into a collective whisper of doom. Then the shouting starts. Shields up. You scramble to obey, though someone nearby is still frantically trying to figure out which end of the shield is up. A moment later, the sky darkens, not with clouds, but with hundreds of tiny death sticks launched from the enemy's side with great enthusiasm. And then they fall. The arrows rain down with all the mercy of an angry god having a very bad day. The man 2 rows ahead of you drops instantly, an arrow sticking out of his shoulder like a forgotten pen. Someone screams. Someone else curses in Latin, or maybe he was just sneezing. It is very hard to tell through the growing panic. Here is what the movies never show. Arrows do not glide gracefully into targets. They thud, they crack, they stick, and sometimes they bounce off armor before getting stuck in things not meant to be pierced, like feet, thighs, and whatever sense of calm you had. You desperately try to hide behind your shield, which suddenly feels far too small and very homemade. An arrow clatters off it with a sharp metallic sound, and you immediately decide that this shield is now your best friend. You mentally name it Gerald. You whisper promises to Gerald that if you both survive, you will never say a bad word about its lopsided shape again. To your left, someone is audibly cursing the archers. To your right, someone else is being cursed, mostly because he forgot to duck. Directly behind you, a man is yelling that he has been hit, though you strongly suspect he is just trying to avoid what is coming next. Then the second volley arrives. At this point, any idea of calm has completely disappeared. Veterans crouch low and mumble desperate phrases. New recruits openly cry. One guy simply lies down and convincingly pretends to be dead. Not a bad strategy, honestly. Eventually, the sky clears. You are alive. Gerald performed admirably. But now, the real horror begins. Close combat, which means it is time to get very sweaty, very loud, and probably stabbed. There is no countdown, no dramatic drum roll, no theatrical, heroic charge like in the songs. One moment you are trembling in your quickly formed line, and the next everything breaks loose. It begins with a surge. Your side moves forward, not with brave determination, but with the reluctant momentum of men who know they will be trampled if they hesitate. Someone ahead of you yells something vaguely inspiring, promptly trips, and gets stepped on. You do not stop to help, not because you are cruel, but because you are pretty sure you will join him if you do. And then you hit, literally. There is a jarring collision. You slam into another human being like two sacks of potatoes wearing sharp objects colliding. Forget fancy sword fighting. This is not a graceful dance. This is a meat grinder. You swing your weapon, maybe a sword, maybe an axe, maybe just a glorified kitchen tool. You do not aim. You do not have time. You flail. You hear metal crash against metal, wood shatter. Men grunt and someone nearby repeatedly yells like it is a war chant. The fighting is close, very intimate. You are now very aware of the smell of the enemy. Sweat, fear, and onions. There is no such thing as personal space. There is only raw panic. At one point, you stab downward and really hope it was not your own foot. Your helmet fogs up. You cannot see. You cannot breathe. Someone's shoulder slams into your ribs, and you both stumble sideways, gasping for air. There is blood on your gauntlet. Not yours, probably. Could be. Does not matter. A man swings wildly at your head. You duck out of pure reflex. He hits someone else. You exchange a brief, wordless look. Half apology, half shrug. There is no time for blame, only for surviving. You try desperately to remember your training, but it mostly consisted of swing hard and do not die. So you keep swinging, sometimes connecting, mostly missing. Every now and then, someone falls. Sometimes they scream. Sometimes they go quiet instantly. You try not to look. This is not a movie. This is a bar fight at the world's worst tavern, with 500 angry men and no one to break it up. And it is only just getting started. If you had any illusions that a medieval battle would sound like the elegant clash of swords and the stirring sound of heroic trumpets, you are very mistaken. It sounds more like a chaotic livestock market colliding with a blacksmith shop during a severe earthquake. The first thing that hits your senses is the screaming. It is constant, not just from the wounded, though there are plenty of those, but from the living. Men yell to psych themselves up. They yell because they have been stabbed. They yell because someone stepped on their foot, or because they have forgotten whose side they are on and are now swinging wildly at anything that moves, including a defenseless bush. You have got the shrill screams of young boys who probably should have stayed in the bakery, deep bellows from large men with axes, and the high-pitched, almost apologetic whimpers of a guy realizing he is wearing the wrong team's colors. Somewhere behind the lines, someone is shouting, "Hold the line!" with all the desperate hope of a man yelling at the tide to stop. No one listens. You cannot even hear him yourself. You are too busy dodging weapons and wondering if your left arm always made that strange clicking sound. Then come the sounds of the weapons themselves. Swords clang harshly against shields. Maces make a dull, horrifying thump when they connect with something soft, usually a face. Arrows whistle past your ears with the precise sound of coming regret. Occasionally, a spear cracks through armor, and the resulting shriek makes your spine reconsider its commitment to staying upright. But the most unsettling sound? It is not the screaming. It is not even the dying. It is the wet sounds. Yes, wet. The squelch of someone stepping in something that used to be a person. The sickening slurp of blood and mud mixing beneath your boots. The unsettling squish when someone lands badly and does not get up. These are not sounds you forget. They live in your nightmares forever. You also hear the constant clanking of armor, men crying out for their mothers, a horse screaming, which, by the way, is deeply haunting, and somewhere, unbelievably, someone trying to sing a hymn badly and off-key. Amidst it all, your ears begin to ring, not from injury, but from sheer sensory overload. You begin to operate purely on instinct because your brain has effectively given up. And still, the screaming continues. If you were expecting a cinematic, slow-motion death, where you deliver a final, profound speech before dramatically collapsing, I am sorry to inform you that is not how this happens. Most people in a medieval battle died unseen, unheard, and from behind, usually hit by someone who did not even know their name. Sometimes it was even someone on their own side. You see, the The battlefield is not a polite arena. It is a sweaty, chaotic mosh pit where everyone is one sudden sneeze away from a fatal mistake. 1 minute you are swinging your axe with fierce determination. The next, thunk asterisk, something hits your back and your knees give out. You fall forward into the mud with the grace of a collapsing haystack. No one notices. No one has time. There are no final words, no comforting hand to hold. Just you, the dirt, and the very strong suspicion that this whole situation could have been avoided if you had just chosen to become a monk. Then there are those taken down by horses. Not stabbed, not slashed, but mercilessly trampled. Nothing quite says. Undignified death, like becoming one with the soil beneath a panicked warhorse you mentally named. Buttercup, and let's not forget the friendly fire, not the kind with explosives, but the kind where a poorly trained militiaman swings a flail in a wide, hopeful arc and accidentally removes your ear or your entire head. Either way, you are forever remembered as that guy who stood a bit too close to Jeff. Some fall and are simply left behind. Whether unconscious, injured, or just very committed to convincingly playing dead, they lie still while boots stomp past. Some of them survive. Some do not. It all depends on luck, the mud conditions, and whether a looter mistakenly thinks they are actual cargo. And sometimes, it is insultingly random. A slipped foot on blood-soaked grass, a snapped ankle in a hole someone dug to relieve themselves in, or getting crushed under a panicked pile of men trying to flee in the same direction. In short, medieval death was not majestic. It was awkward, deeply undignified, and almost always sudden, which is precisely why when a man survives, he is not celebrated for his bravery, but for his sheer, dumb luck. Movies depict them as majestic. Galloping horses ridden by chivalrous knights, charging nobly into battle like thunder on legs. In reality, horses in medieval combat were less glorious machines and more unpredictable battering rams with severe anxiety. When cavalry charges, you do not hear trumpets. You hear a low, ominous rumbling. Not the poetic kind, but the kind that makes your ribs vibrate and convinces your stomach it is time to evacuate. You look up and see them, enormous warhorses charging at speeds you did not think were possible from something that eats grass. The knights look impressive from a distance, with shimmering armor, fluttering banners, and fancy helmets that loudly declare, "I paid extra for this." But up close, it is just screaming. From them, from the horses, from you. Because here is the important thing. Horses do not care about your formations. They do not respect personal space. And they absolutely do not distinguish between the enemy and a guy just trying to stay alive. If you are in their way, you are going to be flattened into something archaeologists will one day label a regretful smear. One man gets run over completely, disappears under hooves, and is never seen again. Another tries to grab a knight's leg, misses, and gets kicked in the chest so hard he might now be legally classified as a belle. Some knights fall off, a surprising number, actually. Turns out slippery mud and full-plate armor do not mix. When they crash, the sound is somewhere between a pantry collapsing and a church bell being punched. They then lie there like confused beetles, flailing and cursing as they desperately try to stand up before someone sticks them with something pointy. And do not think the horses are immune to chaos. One rears up dramatically, gets spooked by a flag, and bolts in the wrong direction, dragging its rider straight toward the latrines. Another simply refuses to move at all, which results in a shouting match between the knight and the horse that everyone else awkwardly ignores. For infantry, there is only one rule. Do not be under the horse. It is a rule everyone learns quickly, often the hard way. By the end, horses are bloodied, men are scattered, and whatever formation existed is now a tragic memory. And the cavalry? They will probably do it all again tomorrow. At some point in the battle, after the arrows, after the screaming, after you have been accidentally elbowed by at least 3 people on your own side, you fall. It might be from a forceful shove, or tripping over a severed limb, or slipping on the world's most sickening combination of blood, bile, and someone's recently spilled breakfast. It does not matter how it happens, you are down. And in a medieval battle, falling down is not part of the plan. It is a critical decision point. You now have about 3 seconds to make a very important choice. Get up and maybe die, or stay down and maybe die. Getting up is bold, noble even, and incredibly dangerous. Because standing up on a battlefield means instantly becoming a very obvious, very upright target in a chaotic sea of distractions. You might get speared just for trying. Worse, you might get trampled by your own side, who now see you as just part of the battlefield floor. On the other hand, staying down is not exactly safe either. People fall on you. Horses stomp dangerously near you. Looters occasionally poke the bodies to see if they are genuinely dead or just trying very hard to appear so. And if someone discovers you are faking, they might get annoyed and permanently fix the situation. Still, many choose the dead possum method. Lie perfectly still, breathe shallowly, and pray nobody steps on your spine. You listen to the chaos swirl around you. Steel hitting steel, men crying out, the unmistakable wet splat of something ending badly. Nearby, a man collapses next to you. He does not move. You try not to look, and sometimes it works. You survive by becoming the battlefield's most committed plank. Eventually, the fight moves on, the noise fades, and you are still breathing. Victory, kind of. The problem is getting back up, because now you are covered in grime, blood, whose, it is unclear, and the subtle shame of surviving by impersonating a corpse. When you do manage to rise, assuming you are not now part of a new human pile, you look around, dazed, hunched, and smelling distinctly like a haunted boot. No one cheers. No one even notices. You are just another body that did not stay down, which, by medieval standards, makes you one of the lucky ones. The battle is over. You are not quite sure how it ended. There was no dramatic banner raised, no villainous general shouting "Retreat!" as trumpets blared. One moment it was chaos. The next, fewer screams, less clanging, more groaning. That is how you know it is done. The noise shifts from aggressive to utterly exhausted. You look around, blinking through blood, hopefully not yours, and sweat. The field is littered with bodies, weapons, and the occasional boot that has somehow separated from its owner and is now resting politely on a rock. It is quiet, unsettlingly so. Someone mumbles, "We won," with all the enthusiasm of a man who just discovered he gets to live, but only in a tent full of disease. Another guy is yelling, "Victory," while clutching his own arm, which is no longer fully attached. You nod in agreement because technically, yes, you are upright, breathing, and mostly unperforated. That is victory. But the truth is, in medieval warfare, victory does not mean fanfare. It means not being dead yet. It means dragging your bruised, aching body back across the field to the camp, past fallen friends and former enemies, all of whom share the same expression. Really? This is how it ends. There is no grand celebration, no lavish feast. You might get half a jug of war ale and some bread that is more weapon than food. A priest mutters prayers over the fallen. A few men search corpses for anything useful. One guy finds a decent pair of boots and declares the day a triumph. Your commander, somehow still impeccably clean, delivers a speech about bravery and honor. You cannot hear it. Your ears are still ringing, and your brain is preoccupied with more pressing matters, like not collapsing. You think about the men who did not make it. Then you think about your foot, which might be broken. Then you think about stew and immediately regret it. But you are alive. Filthy, traumatized, possibly concussed, but alive. Which, in medieval terms, is what they call a resounding success. You sit down on a rock, exhale, and whisper the same thing every survivor of every medieval battle has ever murmured under their breath. Never again. Then you get called back for another skirmish next week. After the swords are put away and the groaning becomes the dominant battlefield sound, it is time for the least glamorous phase of combat: cleanup. You might assume this means burying the dead and tending to the wounded, and technically that is part of it. But really, it is a grim mix of triage, opportunistic looting, and a horrifying medieval arts and crafts project where the main materials are dismembered body parts. First, the medics arrive, and by medics, we mean men with knives, questionable eyesight, and no formal training. They specialize in reassuring phrases like, That will have to come off. And bite on this stick. An experienced surgeon might use wine to clean your wound. A less experienced one might drink it first. You sit down with a sword gash on your thigh and the vague hope that it is not immediately fatal. The barber surgeon, yes, the same guy who normally trims beards, takes one look and says, "We'll see." Then he pulls out a needle that has been sterilized by simply waving it near a candle flame. You do your best not to scream. You fail loudly. Meanwhile, bodies are being dragged into messy piles. Some are covered. Most are not. You recognize a face or two, but you do not linger. The smell is becoming deeply spiritual. Flies arrive in large numbers, eagerly anticipating the all-you-can-eat buffet. One lands on your open wound. You swat it, then realize that is probably the cleanest thing you will experience today. Other soldiers are salvaging equipment, which is a polite way of saying looting. They go through corpses for swords, helmets, shoes, anything not nailed down or still twitching. You do not judge, you do the same. You desperately need new boots, and Gregor does not need his anymore. Sorry? Gregor. Some men dig shallow graves. Others light fires. One guy just sits quietly with a blank stare and a javelin still sticking out of his arm. You try to offer help, he declines. "It's mine now," he mutters. Wounds are roughly bandaged. Some reopen 5 minutes later. Infection is highly likely, amputation probable, and death optional, depending on how lucky you feel and whether the flies decide to take a particular interest. By nightfall, the battlefield has quieted. The living stumble back to camp, covered in mud, blood, and a growing suspicion that the worst is still yet to come. And technically, they are right. You have survived. Technically, you have stumbled off the battlefield with all your limbs mostly intact and just enough brain function to recognize your own boots, which may or may not have belonged to someone else this morning. Now it is time to rest, and by rest, we mean collapse somewhere vaguely dry and try desperately not to cry. Back in camp, everything smells worse, somehow. The lingering scent of sweat, blood, bad stew, and cooked horse flesh hangs in the air like an unspoken curse no one is brave enough to name. You find your spot, a patch of earth slightly less swampy than the rest, and lie down with the grace of a dropped sack of onions. Around you, wounded men groan. Some scream. One sings badly. Another prays to at least 3 different gods just to be safe. A soldier nearby is cleaning his blade with his shirt, which he is still wearing. The cook is serving what might charitably be called food. You approach and receive something in a bowl that is legally not soup, but emotionally still counts. It has the consistency of regret and the color of do not ask. You eat it. You have no shame left. That was lost somewhere between the 5th arrow volley and witnessing a man get slapped to death by a disoriented warhorse. You try to sleep. It does not work. You are too sore, too rattled, and the guy next to you has started snoring with the intensity of a church organ tumbling down a hill. You shift positions 12 times and end up slightly wetter than when you started. You stare at the stars and wonder what terrible thing you did in a past life to deserve this one. Occasionally, someone limps in from the darkness, dragging a sword and muttering something about next time. There will not be a next time. There is always a next time. Your commander walks through camp, pretending to be concerned. His armor is still gleaming. He is not bleeding. You dislike him a little more, and yet you are alive. Your body is one massive bruise. Your brain feels like it has been boiled in onion ale. But you made it. This is what passes for downtime in medieval warfare. Tomorrow, the cleanup continues. Or worse, marching again. Surviving a medieval battle does not earn you deep peace. What it does earn you is a seat around the flickering campfire, a lukewarm mug of something vaguely alcoholic, and the undeniable right to start rewriting history before your bruises have even fully formed. This is how it always ends. Not with a noble ceremony or a bard singing soaring songs of your heroism. No, it ends with a group of filthy, traumatized men huddled on damp logs, trying to one-up each other with stories that grow increasingly questionable by the minute. You listen as a man swears he personally defeated 6 knights with nothing but a frying pan. Another claims he caught an arrow mid-air and miraculously threw it back. Someone else insists he fought a war elephant in France where, crucially, there are no elephants. You nod. You sip. You embellish your own tale a little too. In your version, you did not trip over a corpse and scream. You strategically repositioned. The part where you desperately tried to crawl into a shrub to avoid cavalry now becomes a stealth maneuver. You wisely leave out the moment where you begged a squire to hold your hand during the arrow storm, because everyone here is doing the exact same thing, turning trauma into a convenient legend. It is not about ego, it is about survival. If you can laugh about it, maybe it did not scar you permanently. If you tell the story well enough, maybe it will drown out the actual horrifying memories. The smell of burnt flesh, the vacant look in a dying man's eyes, the sickening sound of metal hitting bone. By now, someone is roasting a questionable piece of meat, and no one is asking any questions. Laughter bubbles up, dry and slightly desperate. A man plays a lute that is missing 2 strings. The tune is off, but no one cares. A woman, a camp follower, patches a sleeve and hums as if the world beyond the fire's glow simply does not exist. You stare into the flickering flames and think, you lived through it, barely, accidentally, miraculously. Soon you will be on the road again, off to another fight, another glorious encounter. But for now, there is warmth, there is bread, there is the rough companionship of men who know exactly how much of your story is false, because theirs is too. And for one night, at least, that is enough. The history of the Great Wall of China. Centuries before the Great Wall became a continuous monument stretching across northern China, the land was a chaotic patchwork of rival kingdoms, each consumed by their own ambitions and anxieties. This was the Warring States period, a time of constant conflict when 7 powerful states fought fiercely for control over the Chinese heartland. These kingdoms, always at odds with one another, had little reason to work together. Instead, they built individual walls, local, makeshift defenses made from tamped earth, stones, and timber. These early fortifications were not part of some grand, unified plan. They were desperate measures, like drawing a line in the sand and daring a rival to cross it. More than just barriers, they were powerful statements of power. This is mine. Try and take it. But it was not just rival kingdoms they feared. To the north, beyond the farms and river valleys, roamed nomadic tribes, with the Xiongnu being the most prominent. These were skilled horsemen who moved like ghosts across the steppes, raiding and disappearing before a response could even be organized. These raids were not just inconvenient. They were major threats that involved stolen livestock, burned villages, and severed trade routes. The scattered states had little choice but to try and wall off the wilderness. The earliest of these regional barriers stretched for miles, but they were fragile, quickly built with rammed earth or layers of brush and mud. Some were reinforced with wooden stakes or rough stone blocks, but few were built to last. What they lacked in permanence, they made up for in sheer manpower. Tens of thousands of peasants, conscripts, and prisoners were forced into the grueling work, often with no choice and no rest. These isolated walls were often poorly maintained, crumbling over time due to harsh weather. Still, they represented the beginning of an idea that China's northern frontier could be tamed, not through negotiation, but through sheer will and persistent wall building. No single king at this time imagined the Great Wall as we know it today. That dream of a single barrier stretching across China would come later, with the rise of an emperor who desired not just power, but a lasting legacy in stone. And so, amidst dust and conflict, the foundation was laid, not for a wall, but for a legend. In 221 BCE, after centuries of constant chaos, a single man achieved what no one before him had. He united all of China. His name was Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, and he did not just want to rule. He wanted to fundamentally change the landscape itself. He envisioned a vast empire, and to protect it, he understood he needed something truly massive. One of his very first orders as emperor was to connect and expand the existing regional walls built during the Warring States period. These individual barriers, some already decaying, would be carefully joined into a single, massive defense network designed to keep the nomadic Xiongnu and other northern tribes away. But this was far from a simple repair job. It was an engineering project of unprecedented scale. Qin's vision went beyond military defense. It was about asserting power, consolidating unity, and maintaining absolute control. A continuous wall symbolized not just the edge of civilization, but the outer boundary of his personal authority. To achieve this monumental task, he conscripted hundreds of thousands of people. Soldiers, peasants, prisoners, and even scholars who had opposed his regime. Many were tragically worked to death in remote mountain passes or scorching deserts, leading the wall to earn a grim nickname, the longest cemetery on Earth. And yet, the sheer scale of the project was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The materials were basic: rammed earth, carefully packed layer by layer between sturdy wooden frames. Workers stomped it down with their feet or pounded it with heavy logs. Where stone was available, it was laboriously moved by sheer brute strength. Tools were primitive and the land was unforgiving. But Qin Shi Huang was relentlessly determined. He did not just build a wall. He also constructed roads, standardized weights and measures, and unified the written script across his vast empire. In his mind, all of it, the roads, the strict rules, the immense walls, were part of one grand project: to create order from chaos and leave an empire that would, he hoped, last forever. The original Qin wall may not have looked like the iconic stone structures we see today, but it was the foundational beginning. It was the start of a boundary that would rise, fall, and rise again through dynasty after dynasty. And next, it would pass into the formidable hands of the Han. After the death of Qin Shi Huang and the quick collapse of the Qin dynasty, many of his sweeping reforms were undone. But the wall was not one of them. The Han dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, which followed the Qin, recognized the same timeless truth: China's northern border was never truly safe. And so, rather than abandon the huge project, the Han emperors expanded, strengthened, and redefined the Great Wall. Under Emperor Wu of Han, in particular, the wall became more than just a military barrier. It became the very backbone of imperial strategy. The Han launched massive campaigns to aggressively push back the Xiongnu, the same nomadic horsemen who had relentlessly troubled the north for generations. In doing so, they extended the wall farther than ever before, pushing into regions that would eventually become crucial routes for trade and movement for centuries. The Han did not just rebuild the Qin walls. They cleverly adapted them. Instead of relying only on rammed earth, they used bricks, stones, and more sophisticated fortifications where the land allowed. Watchtowers were strategically added at regular intervals, allowing soldiers to spot raiding parties from a distance and quickly light signal fires. An early warning system that let news of an attack travel hundreds of miles in just a few hours. More than just a military tool, the Han Wall evolved into a complex logistical network. Garrison posts, signal towers, and supply depots turned the wall into a functional military road. Troops could move quickly, supplies could be sent efficiently, and messages could travel with incredible speed by beacon or runner. The Great Wall had become more than just a line. It was now a living, interconnected system of defense. Life along the Han Wall was undeniably harsh, but it was not forgotten by history. The empire stationed thousands of soldiers and settlers in remote forts, creating a frontier society where families, merchants, and outposts relied on imperial protection. Over time, these lonely stations grew into small communities, and in their shadows, cultures met. Han Chinese and nomadic tribes traded, mingled, and occasionally fought in these dusty crossroads. By the end of the Han era, the wall had transformed into something entirely new. Not just a line of defense, but a powerful symbol of imperial presence in the vast northern lands. And yet, even the mighty Han could not hold the line forever. Next came chaos, collapse, and eventually, a new dynasty with a bold new style of wall building. With the fall of the Han dynasty in 220 CE, China once again broke apart into widespread political disunity and conflict. What had been a powerful, centralized empire split into rival kingdoms during the Three Kingdoms period, followed by centuries of deep instability. And as the emperors fell, so did the strategic importance of the Great Wall. Many long stretches of the Han and Qin walls crumbled into dust. Neglect, erosion, and looting took their toll. Station outposts were abandoned, watchtowers collapsed, And in many areas, the wall became less a physical structure and more a buried memory, half swallowed by shifting sands and creeping vines. Without a strong central government to maintain it, the Great Wall was simply too vast to preserve. But the threats from the north never truly went away. Nomadic powers like the Xianbei, the Rouran, and later the Gokturks rose and expanded across the steppes. Some of these groups would eventually create their own kingdoms within China, blending cultures while redrawing borders. The wall in these turbulent times was less a hard, impenetrable border and more a fragmented relic of an older vision of defense, a line that no longer matched the complex political reality. Yet, pieces of the wall still served local rulers. Some warlords and regional dynasties used leftover segments of the ancient defenses as the basis for new fortifications. Others mined the old walls for materials. Bricks and stones were repurposed to build homes, temples, or their own regional walls. It was a slow, deliberate dismantling of a fallen empire's bones. Meanwhile, in the popular imagination, the wall faded. It was no longer an empire-wide project, but a thing of legends and old records. Chinese poets wrote of distant battlegrounds and lonely border fortresses, painting the northern frontier as a cold, bitter place where men went to die and were rarely remembered. Still, even in this era of decay, the fundamental idea of the wall remained powerful. It lingered as a potent symbol of what China had once been and what it could be again. A dream of unity, strength, and clarity in the face of widespread chaos. And that dream would stir once more when a new dynasty, born from military conquest and fueled by ambition, rose powerfully from the ashes. The Ming. But first, centuries more would pass. By the time the Ming dynasty came to power in 1368, China had endured centuries of invasion, collapse, and foreign rule. The trauma of the Yuan dynasty, which had been governed by the Mongols, was still fresh in the collective memory. When the Ming successfully overthrew them, it was not just a political victory. It was a profound cultural turning point. And with that came an urgent, unwavering priority. Never again. The Ming emperors recognized the immediate need for a strong, fortified northern barrier, not as a mere symbolic gesture, but as a completely practical necessity. And unlike the earthen walls of the Qin or the scattered garrisons of the Han, the Ming Wall would be something entirely different. Solid stone, durable brick, and integrated firepower. Construction began in earnest in the late 1400s and dramatically increased in the 1500s, especially under the skilled direction of generals like Qi Jiguang, who saw the wall not only as a defense against persistent Mongol raids but as a powerful way of projecting Ming control. This was a dynasty that desired permanence, and it clearly showed in their construction. They built with carefully quarried stone and kiln-fired bricks. The walls were heavily reinforced, intricate drainage systems were added, and watchtowers rose at regular intervals. Beacons were installed to send smoke signals by day and blazing flames at night, a crucial early warning system. This was the version of the Great Wall that most people imagine today. Massive, winding, and utterly iconic. It stretched across formidable mountains, snaked through desolate deserts, and clung precariously to cliffs like a majestic ribbon of armor. Some sections were as wide as a modern highway, others rose as high as a three-story building, and all of it was meticulously designed to last. But the wall was more than just military hardware. Along its vast length, the Ming dynasty built extensive garrison towns, crucial supply depots, and substantial troop housing, creating a parallel society of soldiers, farmers, and administrators who lived and worked constantly in its shadow. The wall was not just a line between China and the so-called barbarians. It was a vital lifeline for the countless soldiers who bravely defended it and the immense empire that completely depended on its existence. Still, even the formidable Ming Wall was not entirely impenetrable. The nomads adapted, raiders found weak points, and corruption unfortunately spread among the guards. And when the Manchus eventually arrived, they did not have to charge through the wall. They were simply allowed in. But before that final fall, the Ming had achieved the impossible. They transformed a mere myth into solid stone and, in doing so, made the Great Wall truly great. Behind the sheer grandeur of the battlements and towering parapets, the Great Wall was also a place defined by grit, monotonous routine, and sheer survival for the thousands of men stationed along its vast length during the Ming Dynasty. Life there was far from heroic. It was harsh, brutally cold, and often completely forgotten by the very empire they had sworn to protect. Soldiers lived in fortified barracks and sparse garrison towns scattered along the wall's winding spine. These were not elite troops in gleaming, polished armor. They were largely conscripted farmers, petty criminals, and desperate peasants. Men who traded their freedom or their uncertain futures for a bowl of rice, a pair of worn boots, and a crude bed behind formidable stone walls. Some served voluntarily, seeking meager pay or a fleeting sense of honor. Others were sent as punishment, exiled to the harsh frontier where winter bit relentlessly and boredom settled like an inescapable frost. Each day began with predictable routines: patrols, drills, constant maintenance of the wall, and the grueling hauling of supplies. The wall itself was in perpetual need of care. Stones shifted, mortar cracked, and watchtowers required mending. Soldiers repaired what they could with frozen, aching hands, facing down sandstorms in the west or blizzards in the north. There were no holidays, only relentless shifts and the distant, ever-present threat of a Mongol raid. Food was simple and often tragically scarce. Millet, beans, and salted meat. Vegetables were grown in small, desperate plots where the unforgiving soil allowed. If a raiding party successfully attacked a supply caravan, it was not just an inconvenience. It could mean outright starvation. Disease was common, morale was perpetually low, and desertion, despite the harsh punishment of execution, was not unheard of. But life was not entirely bleak. Families often accompanied soldiers, creating small, insular communities along the wall. Children were born in its vast shadow. Merchants traveled between garrisons, trading wine, cloth, and vital gossip. Some posts even saw subtle cultural blending as nomadic groups and Han settlers intermingled through trade, marriage, or uneasy temporary peace. Then there were the beacon keepers, stationed at isolated towers, often far from any main garrison. Their solemn job was to constantly watch the horizon. A column of smoke by day, a blazing fire by night. That was the critical signal. Fast, simple, and terrifyingly urgent. These men lived alone or in pairs, surrounded by nothing but profound silence and an endless sky. To live on the Great Wall was to exist between worlds, between empire and untamed wilderness, between grand myth and harsh reality. These were the invisible lives that tirelessly kept the wall standing. Not emperors, not mighty generals, just ordinary people with calloused hands and perpetually cold feet. And yet, for all their relentless effort, the wall could not hold forever. For centuries, the Great Wall stood as the ultimate symbol of Chinese strength, unyielding stone against shifting sands, empire against the daunting unknown. But walls, no matter how high or thick, are ultimately only as strong as the people guarding them. And in the 1600s, that strength irrevocably cracked, not from an outside charge, but from deep within. By the late Ming Dynasty, corruption had spread like a rot throughout the imperial system. Troop salaries were delayed or stolen, and vital supplies vanished before reaching the isolated garrisons. The once disciplined soldiers manning the wall were now underpaid, underfed, and overworked. Morale plummeted. Many garrisons resorted to smuggling and local trade to survive, often collaborating with the very steppe nomads they were supposed to repel. It was in this profoundly weakened state that the Ming faced their greatest threat yet: the Manchus, a rapidly rising power from the northeast. Unlike earlier nomadic tribes, the Manchus were highly organized, politically savvy, and just as determined to rule as any Chinese dynasty. They did not need to storm the wall with fire and fury. All they needed was a strategically open gate. That gate appeared in 1644, when a Ming general named Wu Sangue made a fateful decision that would forever alter the course of history. Faced with a devastating peasant rebellion that had already seized Beijing, and with his own forces outmatched, Wu opened the Shanhai Pass, one of the most critical entry points through the wall, to the Manchu army. He desperately hoped they would help suppress the rebellion. Instead, they took the capital and founded a new dynasty, the Qing. In one swift move, the Great Wall's entire purpose collapsed. It had not been conquered. It had been bypassed, betrayed by the very people it was built to protect. The wall simply could not defend against shifting loyalties, desperate circumstances, or cynical political convenience. Under the following Qing dynasty, the Great Wall largely faded from strategic importance. The empire expanded deep into the north, pushing far past the physical barrier that had once marked the edge of Chinese civilization. The wall was no longer a frontier. It was a relic, a fading memory of a different world. And so, the Great Wall, which had taken centuries of immense effort to build, was rendered obsolete in a single pivotal moment of human error. No breach, no long siege, just a key in the wrong hands. But legends rarely die so easily. After the Manchus seized power and the Qing dynasty extended China's borders well beyond the wall, the once mighty fortification began its slow, quiet fade, not with a dramatic crash, but with a barely noticeable whisper. It was no longer a pressing military necessity. New trade routes bypassed it, and new fortresses were built deeper into the expanding frontier. The Great Wall, that colossal symbol of imperial resolve, simply became irrelevant. Without a clear purpose, maintenance stopped. The garrisons emptied. Watchtowers were left to crumble. Local villages scavenged its bricks to build homes, dig wells, and construct pig pens. In some places, entire stretches were dismantled, stone by laborious stone, not out of malice, but out of sheer practicality. Why quarry new material when the old wall sat unused? In deserts, sand slowly swallowed vast sections of it. In the mountains, relentless tree roots split stones apart. Rains washed away mortar. Centuries of storms, earthquakes, and the simple passage of time transformed once grand battlements into lopsided ridges and forgotten humps on the distant horizon. Travelers and poets still spoke of its former grandeur, but few bothered to visit. For most of the Qing dynasty, the wall was largely a monument to a bygone age, respected but rarely maintained. It was not until the 19th and early 20th centuries, as China dealt with increasing foreign invasion, devastating civil war, and the profound challenges of modernization, that the wall began to re-emerge in the national consciousness. Foreigners, especially European explorers and scholars, started to arrive with wide eyes and eager notebooks. They romanticized it, they marveled at it, and some even misunderstood it, mistakenly believing the entire structure had been built by one emperor or that it was magically visible from the moon. By the time the People's Republic of China was established in 1949, the wall had transcended its physical form. It was now a powerful symbol of Chinese identity, unwavering endurance, and ingenious human spirit. Mao Zedong famously declared, "He who has not climbed the Great Wall is not a true man," thereby transforming it from a mere ruin into a patriotic rite of passage. In the late 20th century, extensive restoration projects began, particularly near Beijing. Tourists flocked to sites like Badaling, where the wall was meticulously reconstructed to its Ming glory. Other sections, wild, broken, and preserving their authentic decay, remained untouched, slowly succumbing to the relentless embrace of nature. From forgotten ruin to global icon, the Great Wall had completed a strange, incredible journey. No longer primarily a barrier of defense, it had become a profound bridge to the past, a powerful reminder of what human beings can construct when driven by fear, immense ambition, and dreams that stretch across centuries. The Great Wall of China is one of the most widely recognized structures on Earth, yet much of what people believe about it is shrouded in myth and considerable exaggeration. Contrary to popular belief, it is not a single, continuous wall, but rather a complex network of fortifications built by various dynasties over a span of more than 2,000 years, winding through mountains, deserts, and plains. It definitively does not form an unbroken line, and no, it is absolutely not visible from the moon. But the truth is far more fascinating. The wall is less about stone and mortar and far more about profound memory and deep metaphor. It represents a civilization's long, arduous struggle to define itself, not just against external outsiders, but against the inherent chaos within its own borders. It tells a compelling story of emperors obsessed with imposing order, of peasants compelled into backbreaking labor, and of generals whose legacies were measured not primarily in military victories, but in feet of arduous construction. It is the tangible product of an ambition so vast it literally left a scar visible from the sky. Throughout China's rich history, the wall has held vastly different meanings for different people. To emperors, it was a potent symbol of control. To soldiers, it was a harsh prison of unending duty. To poets, it was a lonely, desolate place echoing with the wind and the profound weight of separation. And to modern China, it has become an immovable cultural anchor, a powerful reminder of national endurance, strength, and unwavering pride. Millions of tourists now visit, hiking restored paths and posing beside ancient watchtowers. They are drawn not just to the breathtaking view but to the powerful myth, the awe-inspiring idea that human hands could shape something so immense, so defiant, that it would outlast kingdoms, dynasties, and even time itself. And in many profound ways, it truly has. Yet, large portions of the wall remain in ruins. Over 30% has already disappeared, either eroded naturally or systematically dismantled. Preservation is now a desperate race against relentless weather, unchecked development, and persistent neglect. The fundamental challenge today is not to build the wall, but to remember and diligently protect what remains, to preserve a past that stretches over continents and centuries. In the end, the Great Wall was never truly about keeping enemies out. It was about drawing a clear line between civilization and untamed wilderness, between a flourishing empire and pervasive uncertainty, between what was known and what was fiercely feared. And in doing so, it became something far greater than mere defense. It became an enduring legend. Stone by stone, story by story, the wall still stands, not just physically in the hills of northern China, but vividly in the collective imagination of the entire world. The story of the Pony Express. The year was 1860, and America was a country on the edge of both greatness and devastating collapse. With the ominous rumblings of civil war on the horizon and gold fever gripping California, one thing was painfully clear. The United States was expanding faster than its communication lines could possibly keep up. The East Coast was already buzzing with new telegram wires and rapidly expanding railroads, but the West might as well have been another continent. Sending a letter from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California, could take 3 to 4 weeks on a good day. That was, of course, if the stagecoaches were not delayed by snow, bandits, or the collapse of a rickety bridge. And in a country deeply obsessed with the idea of manifest destiny, waiting a month to hear if your gold shipment had arrived or whether Lincoln had been nominated was simply unacceptable. The government had tried various alternatives. Steamships navigating around Cape Horn or through the Panama Isthmus, both risky, expensive, and painfully slow. But the West urgently needed real-time updates, not news that was already outdated by the time it arrived. What the country truly needed was speed, and preferably something that did not involve a 6-month cruise around South America. Enter the Pony Express, a bold, reckless, and some might say wildly impractical idea. The basic concept was strikingly simple. Establish a chain of young, lightweight riders on horseback, racing day and night across nearly 2,000 miles of rugged, unforgiving terrain. Relay stations would be strategically placed every 10 to 15 miles, fresh horses swapped in mere minutes, and absolutely no one stopped. Rain, snow, or arrows be damned. Letters would now travel from Missouri to California in under 10 days. It sounded completely insane, but then again, so did building a transcontinental railroad, and look how that turned out. This was not just about delivering mail. It was about proving that the vast American frontier could be conquered with sheer grit, unwavering courage, and a lot of saddle sores. It was about symbolically shrinking a sprawling, chaotic country into something that felt just a little more connected. And at the center of it all stood a ragtag team of shrewd businessmen, audacious teenage riders, and weary station masters, about to make history on horseback. But as quickly as it rose, the Pony Express would soon find itself racing against something it could not possibly outrun: the speed of light itself. The organizers behind the Pony Express were not wild cowboys or government officials. They were shrewd businessmen, ambitious, and perhaps a bit desperate. William H. Russell, Alexander Majors, and William B. Waddell were already deeply involved in the overland freight business. They managed crucial supply lines to army posts across the vast West, transporting everything from flour to heavy cannons through challenging Indian territory and barren plains. But government contracts were decreasing, and the economy was uncertain, so they did what all great capitalists do when cornered. They took a gamble. Their ambitious new plan was to launch the fastest mail service in American history and secure a lucrative government deal to make it profitable. They officially named it the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company, which does not exactly roll off the tongue. The newspapers and the public quickly gave it a much more exciting name, the Pony Express. This was not just a logistical venture. It was an all-out sprint across what felt like hell itself. The route stretched nearly 2,000 miles from St. Joseph, Missouri, to Sacramento, California, cutting directly through the unforgiving heart of the American wilderness. There were formidable mountain passes in the Rockies that had swallowed entire wagon trains, and desolate deserts in Nevada where horses could collapse within hours. Yet, Russell and company were completely convinced they could make it work. They built over 150 relay stations, hired about 80 riders, and bought 400 of the toughest, fastest ponies money could buy. Their initial goal was highly symbolic: deliver Lincoln's inaugural address to California in record time. The plan was a daring PR stunt, but also a direct challenge to the growing telegraph and the established stagecoach, two giants of 19th century communication. They launched the first ride on April 3, 1860. A large crowd gathered in St. Joseph to watch the first rider bolt out of town with a mail pouch slung over his saddle. Cheers erupted. A legend was born. Behind the scenes, the company was losing a lot of money. Stations had to be consistently manned, horses fed, riders paid, and equipment constantly replaced. But no one cared about the finances yet. All eyes were on the trail. Could this daring experiment actually succeed? What followed was not just fast. It was a blur of raw courage, relentless chaos, and wild improvisation. Riders raced through blizzards, dodged ambushes, and sometimes even crossed rivers that were still partially frozen. They were not just carrying mail. They were carrying the profound promise of a united country. And for a brief, shining moment, it miraculously worked. The Pony Express had one primary, somewhat unsettling, requirement for its riders. They had to be exceptionally young, ideally orphans. That way, if they died on the trail, no one would complain too loudly. The typical rider was between 14 and 20 years old, weighing no more than 125 pounds. The lighter the boy, the faster the horse. Advertisements famously sought skinny, wiry fellows not over 18. Orphans preferred. It was part job offer, part audacious dare, and the ones who answered were a special breed. Reckless, stubbornly determined, and naturally wired for speed. Among the most legendary was William Buffalo Bill Cody, who would later become a Wild West icon, though there is historical debate about how much he actually rode for the Express. Still, the image of a teenage Cody charging through hostile territory with nothing but a revolver and a mail pouch helped solidify the myth. Then there was Pony Bob Haslam, who completed one of the longest and most dangerous rides in Express history. 120 miles through Paiute territory with fresh arrows reportedly sticking out of his shoulder. These were not just delivery boys. They were true adrenaline junkies. Riders galloped through sleet and sandstorms, often riding day and night with very little rest. They carried a mochila, a specialized saddlebag designed to be easily tossed between horses, which held the sacred cargo. About 20 pounds of letters, tightly packed and sealed in oilskin to protect against the weather. Every second was crucial. Riders changed horses roughly every 10 to 15 miles, pausing only long enough to fling the mochila over a fresh saddle and quickly gulp some water. Each rider would typically cover 75 to 100 miles in a single stretch, then collapse at a home station for food and much-needed rest. And then they would do it all over again. Dangers were at every turn. Bandits, wild animals, treacherous river crossings, and attacks by hostile indigenous groups defending their lands from intrusion. The Express did not carry weapons of war, but every rider carried a revolver, a knife, and a great amount of nerve. They rode alone through the desolate night, often with no company except for the rhythmic sound of hooves and the whistling wind. Despite the constant danger, the Pony Express rarely failed to deliver. The mail got through, almost always, and in those fleeting 18 months, these teenage daredevils became legends, living, breathing symbols of American tenacity. While the riders got all the glory, it was the intricate network of relay stations, approximately 157 of them, that made the Pony Express truly work. Without them, there would have been no heroic dashes, number 10-day record times, and certainly no letters reaching Sacramento safely. These stations were the unsung heroes, scattered roughly every 10 to 15 miles across vast deserts, expansive plains, and challenging mountain passes, like tiny islands of civilization in an ocean of untamed wilderness. There were two main types: relay stations and home stations. Relay stations were simple structures where a rider would quickly swap their tired horse for a fresh one. The exchange was a pit stop in the purest sense, often completed in under 2 minutes. Picture it: a kid barely old enough to vote, galloping in at full speed, flinging the mochila onto a waiting saddle, and bolting off again in a cloud of dust. Home stations were spaced about every 75 to 100 miles and served as the rider's main resting point. Here, the young men could eat, sleep, and try to recover before heading out again. These were often run by station keepers and their families, living in isolated cabins or sod houses with little more than a fireplace and a strong sense of duty. Mail delivery completely depended on them. A missed horse, a closed gate, or a sleepy attendant could cause hours of delay, and that was unacceptable. Life at these stations was not glamorous. Supplies were scarce. Stations in the high desert or deep plains had to fend off raids, survive brutal winters, and deal with wildlife ranging from venomous rattlesnakes to hungry wolves. Station keepers often lived with a rifle within arm's reach and slept with one eye open. And yet, the system largely worked most of the time. Horses were strategically placed, riders followed strict schedules, and each station served as a crucial heartbeat in the grand system of the Pony Express. Miss a beat and the whole system suffered. But when it all worked, it was magic. Messages that once took weeks suddenly arrived in 9 or 10 days. A letter sent from New York could pass through dozens of hands, hundreds of hooves, and across a continent's worth of danger, and still arrive ahead of schedule. The system was bold, fragile, and breathtakingly efficient. But it was also very expensive, and now it was time to pay the price. The Pony Express was fast, amazingly fast for its time. But speed came at a high cost, and not just in risk, sweat, or the occasional horse that dropped dead mid-route. The cost was very real, very financial, and completely unsustainable. From its very beginning, the Pony Express lost money. Operating across 1,900 miles of harsh terrain required huge resources. Just building the basic infrastructure, stations, barns, corrals, and supply depots, cost the founders around $200,000, a massive fortune in 1860. Then there were the horses, hundreds of them, each specifically bred for speed and endurance, not a long life. And, of course, the riders and station workers all had to be paid, though not very well. Each letter initially cost the customer $5 for half an ounce. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly $170 today just to send a short message. Even when the price eventually dropped to $1, it was still too expensive for most Americans. The service was primarily used for urgent government or business mail, think Wall Street, not your grandma's birthday card. Despite all the daring and glory, the Pony Express was never a profitable business. The founders, Russell, Majors, and Waddell, had banked heavily on getting a lucrative government mail contract, but that crucial deal never happened. The U.S. Post Office was hesitant to fund what many saw as a dangerous stunt, and the increasing political instability leading up to the Civil War did not help. By late 1860, the financial strain became unbearable. Horses needed feeding, stations required constant upkeep, riders had to be replaced, and all of this was funded directly out of pocket. Worse, the public's view of the Express as a romantic adventure hid the brutal reality. It was a logistical nightmare running on borrowed time. Then came the final blow. In October 1861, the transcontinental telegraph was completed. Suddenly, a message could travel from coast to coast in mere seconds. No horses, no riders, no risk, just dots and dashes over a wire. It was the undeniable future. Cold, efficient, and unstoppable. 2 days after the telegraph line officially opened, the Pony Express shut down. 18 months. That is all it lasted. But in that brief time, it became a legend, not because it made a profit, but because it proved something far bolder: that America could outpace its formidable obstacles. On October 24, 1861, a tiny but powerful revolution clicked into place across America. The final link of the transcontinental telegraph was completed, connecting the East Coast with the West for the first time in history by wire. In that single moment, the very problem the Pony Express was designed to solve, speedy cross-country communication, was instantly made obsolete. Messages that once took 10 days by horse could now be sent in mere minutes. It was not glamorous. There were no charging stallions or heroic riders racing through blizzards, just highly trained telegraph operators tapping out Morse code into buzzing machines. But it worked, and it worked far better than anyone had expected. For the Pony Express, it was like trying to outrun lightning. You could be the fastest courier alive, but you simply could not beat the raw efficiency of electricity traveling down a copper wire. 2 days after that telegraph line was completed, the Pony Express officially closed. No dramatic finale, no farewell ride, just silence. Ironically, it was the same silence left behind after the last Morse signal went out each night. For Russell, Majors, and Waddell, it was a complete financial disaster. They had poured everything into the business, desperately hoping to get that elusive government contract, but the government, now completely in love with the telegraph, saw little use for a horse-based mail system. The company was dissolved, its assets sold off, and its founders faded into bankruptcy or were forgotten. And yet, for all its speed and undeniable progress, the telegraph did not inspire the same kind of emotional connection. You could not paint it in heroic brush strokes. There were no ballads about clicking dots and dashes. The Pony Express, despite its financial failure, had the better story. Its riders became legends. Their adventures were retold in dime novels, stage plays, and eventually, classic Western films. Even Buffalo Bill, whose actual involvement with the Express was likely exaggerated, built an entire career on the back of that legend. So while the telegraph won the race, the Pony Express definitely won the myth. It represented a final, romantic gasp of old-world adventure before America truly became wired, mechanized, and thoroughly modern. Though the Pony Express galloped into history in just 18 months, its legend would outlive its brief lifespan by more than a century. Almost immediately after it shut down, writers, journalists, and showmen began turning it into a powerful myth. A romantic tale of great danger, incredible speed, and rugged American spirit. The truth was already impressive, but for the public, truth was not enough. They wanted something larger than life. So, stories began to stretch. Riders were said to outrun native raiders, miraculously leap across canyons, and survive days without water. Historians might have questioned it, but readers eagerly bought the dime novels by the wagon load. No one capitalized on this growing myth better than William Buffalo Bill Cody. Though his actual time with the Pony Express is unclear, if it happened at all, Cody saw a great opportunity. In his wildly popular traveling Wild West show, Cody dramatically reenacted thrilling Pony Express rides before cheering crowds across both Europe and the United States. Children grew up idolizing the iconic image of the lone rider bravely facing the wilderness, a sack of urgent letters slung across his back. By the late 19th century, the Pony Express had become more than just a failed mail service. It had become a national symbol of frontier bravery, of manifest destiny, of a bygone era when a single teenager on a Mustang could seemingly carry the weight of the nation's communication on his slender shoulders. Towns along the original route began commemorating the stations. Statues of galloping riders were erected in town squares, and plaques were placed. In St. Joseph, Missouri, and Sacramento, California, historical markers proudly declared, "Here began the Pony Express." School children were taught about the riders as if they were founding fathers on horseback. And Hollywood, of course, came galloping in. Silent films, television shows, and countless westerns featured exaggerated but undeniably lovable versions of the Express, often completely ignoring how brutal, short-lived, and economically disastrous the real thing had been. Still, the romantic appeal continued. And perhaps it is because the Pony Express tapped into something timeless. The enduring idea that sheer determination and raw grit could overcome impossible odds, that youth and courage still profoundly mattered, that even in the face of rapidly advancing technology, there was still a sacred space for the human spirit to shine, if only briefly. So, even as the telegraph wires hummed overhead, and later telephone lines and satellites followed, the powerful image of a young rider tearing across the plains never quite faded from the American imagination. The Pony Express did not just deliver mail. It delivered a myth, a blueprint, a rugged silhouette of what Americans desperately wanted to believe about themselves. In a country stitched together by immense ambition and calculated risk, it became the perfect story, bold, brief, tragic, and utterly brimming with speed. At its very heart, the Pony Express captured a uniquely American fantasy. That one determined individual, with enough courage and sheer grit, could shoulder the immense burden of a vast nation on their back. A teenage rider braving relentless storms and whistling arrows symbolized not just frontier grit, but a youthful, defiant spirit against the impossible. It was not about mere efficiency. It was profoundly about heart. As the 20th century dawned and America fully entered the industrial age, that cowboy on a mission, energy transformed into a kind of potent nostalgic fuel. Railroads might have eventually spanned the entire continent, and telegraphs might have connected distant cities in milliseconds, but those machines, it was felt, somehow lacked soul. The Pony Express was the last time communication felt truly human, urgently personal, and genuinely heroic. It was the final, romantic gasp before impersonal wires and gears replaced muscle and raw sweat. Politically, the story of the Pony Express also proved remarkably convenient. It painted the relentless expansion westward as noble and exhilarating, rather than the often messy, violent, or exploitative reality. School books frequently taught it as a triumph of courage, not as a complex story of risky capital investment or deep conflict with indigenous peoples. In this way, the Pony Express effectively helped launder the more uncomfortable parts of American expansion into a feel-good national narrative. A teenager galloping through the desert is inherently easier to celebrate than a land dispute or a bankrupt freight company. Still, that does not diminish its profound impact. It definitively proved that the vast West could be connected, that immense distance could be conquered. And even though the Express ultimately failed financially, it helped pave the way, both literally and figuratively, for the crucial infrastructure that would follow: the telegraph, the railroad, and eventually the transcontinental highway. In a way, the Express was America's awkward teenage phase. Bold ideas, clumsy execution, high ideals, and a few broken bones along the way. It was a short-lived miracle that powerfully set the stage for something far bigger. And even now, when modern communication happens with a mere tap, there is still something deeply stirring about a lone horseman galloping into the unknown. Because somewhere, buried deep in the dust, is the enduring reminder that progress once arrived on four legs and raw nerve. On October 26, 1861, just 2 days after the transcontinental telegraph line officially went live, the last Pony Express rider galloped into Sacramento. There were no celebratory fireworks, no grand farewell parade, just a quiet, unassuming end to one of the boldest communication experiments in American history. It was over just like that. But that final ride was not a failure. In fact, it was a profound victory lap. The Express had fulfilled its critical mission. It had definitively proven that a country as wide and wild as the United States could be connected swiftly, reliably, and with remarkable human tenacity. Even though it was quickly replaced by the rapid flicker of telegraph signals, the Pony Express had set an indelible standard. Urgency, bravery, and daring could still profoundly matter, even in a world increasingly dominated by wires and machines. In the decades that followed, the Pony Express became almost mythological. Statues of galloping riders were erected in town squares. Reenactments were performed every July. Postal stamps commemorated its brief, breathless run, and historians, sometimes amused, sometimes genuinely in awe, continued to revisit those pivotal 18 months that fundamentally changed how America perceived itself. It is easy to forget how incredibly fragile the entire undertaking was. Letters were carried in lightweight pouches that could be passed between riders in mere seconds. Horses were rigorously trained to run full tilt over treacherous cliffs, through roaring rivers, and across imposing mountains. Riders were barely old enough to grow a beard. There were ambushes, stampedes, and blinding snowstorms. And still, against all odds, most of the mail arrived on time. The Express also left behind something more subtle, yet profoundly influential. A powerful template for how Americans would come to view risk and reward. Silicon Valley founders and Wall Street gamblers often speak with reverence about Pony Express energy. Bold moves made fast, with the odds seemingly stacked against you. It is still widely used as a metaphor for attempting something seemingly insane simply because it just might work, even if it ultimately does not. Today, when you send a message across the planet in a second, it is hard to truly grasp what 10 days on horseback actually meant. But that is precisely the point. The Pony Express is not remembered because it lasted. It is remembered because it dared to try. For one brief, shining moment, a group of kids on horseback outran the world. And though they were eventually surpassed by the telegraph, the telephone, and the internet, they achieved what few ventures ever do. They made history, and then they became legend. And that, more than mere speed, is what made the Pony Express truly unforgettable. The history of the violin. Before the violin found its graceful place under the chins of concert masters and esteemed soloists, before it filled opera houses and intricate sonatas with aching emotion, it lived many different lives under many different names. Its profound story begins not in Italy, but far earlier, in the vast, windswept grasslands of Central Asia. Here, centuries ago, horsehair was strung across simple wooden bows to stroke the strings of instruments like the morincour and the rebab. These early bowed instruments, primarily used by nomadic herders, produced low, nasal tones that often mimicked the haunting human voice or the distinctive sounds of the animals they lived alongside. The underlying idea was revolutionary, using friction rather than plucking or striking to sustain a continuous note. It was the foundational birth of an expressive technique that would echo across countless cultures. As crucial trade routes flourished, these new bowed instruments moved steadily westward along the legendary Silk Road, through Persia, into the Arab world, and eventually into southern Europe. The rebab, in particular, was carried into Moorish Spain during the 8th and 9th centuries, where it gracefully blended with local musical traditions. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire developed the lyra, another significant bowed instrument that would later profoundly influence Eastern European designs. Each culture added its unique contribution: a different tuning, a new shape, an additional string. These instruments did not evolve in a straight, linear path. They branched out organically, much like a complex family tree. In medieval Europe, the rebab gave rise to the vielle and the fiddle, boxier bowed instruments held against the chest or tucked under the chin. These became the common tools of wandering minstrels and church musicians, playing simple melodies in taverns, bustling streets, and courtly halls. Their sound was raw but intimately expressive. Their construction basic but cleverly designed. The bow had definitively arrived, and with it, a new way of thinking about music, not just as a sequence of short, distinct notes, but as a flowing, continuous voice. But these early fiddles were still rudimentary compared to what was yet to come. Their shapes varied wildly, their tuning was often inconsistent, and there was no established standard form, no refined soundboard, no fingerboard optimized for true agility. Still, within their wavering tones and handmade quirks, the emerging soul of the violin was undeniably beginning to stir. The core concept was firmly in place. The deep desire for something more agile, more emotionally resonant, more profoundly human. It was simply waiting for the right hands, in the perfect place, at the right moment. As the Middle Ages transitioned into the vibrant Renaissance, Europe found itself awash in a flood of groundbreaking new ideas about art, science, and, critically, music. Amidst the rising cathedrals and growing courts, a quiet but profound transformation was happening. The roughly made fiddles and vielles of earlier centuries were being carefully refined, not only in their physical appearance but, more importantly, in their fundamental purpose. Instruments were no longer simply for accompanying dances or providing church drones. They were rapidly becoming sophisticated vehicles for profound artistic expression. By the 15th century, bowed string instruments had become common throughout Western Europe. You could hear them in lively taverns, at joyous weddings, in elegant noble chambers, and in bustling theaters. However, no two instruments looked quite the same. The viol often had 5 strings, and its shape varied wildly from one maker to another. The lira da braccio, an Italian favorite, had a broader body and a flatter bridge, making it ideal for playing chords, a popular choice among Renaissance poets who favored their verses being accompanied by music. But despite their growing popularity, these instruments still had significant limitations. Their sound was not loud enough, their tuning systems were notoriously unreliable, and their overall design was too clumsy for true virtuosity. Musicians and composers began to demand more flexibility, greater range, enhanced clarity, and increased responsiveness. They yearned for an instrument that could sing with the profound expressiveness of a human voice, yet also have the agile clarity of a flute. A quiet revolution was already stirring in the world of instrument making. Skilled artisans across Italy and Germany were tirelessly experimenting with precisely curved wood, innovative new varnishes, and more precise carving tools. They were not just shaping wood, they were carefully sculpting resonance. Luthiers began to intuitively understand that the intricate shape and varying thickness of the wood dramatically influenced the sound it produced. Thinner tops vibrated more effectively, rounded backs projected sound further, and arched bridges allowed for the nuanced playing of individual strings. Musical tastes were also rapidly evolving. Composers began writing increasingly intricate and demanding parts for bowed instruments. The demand was not only for rhythm or simple harmony, it was for rich, lyrical melody and solo expression. The stage was being carefully set for a new, refined type of instrument to emerge, one that was compact, agile, and profoundly expressive. Europe now had all the essential ingredients: the centuries-old lineage of bowed instruments, the surging artistic energy of the Renaissance, and a new class of master builders poised to carve out the musical future. All that was missing was someone bold enough to completely reimagine the instrument from its very foundations. And in the small Italian town of Cremona, that someone was about to pick up a chisel. In the fertile plains of northern Italy, nestled along the meandering Po River, lies the unassuming town of Cremona. During the 16th century, it was neither a grand capital nor a formidable military power, but it was home to something entirely different: craftsmanship at its absolute finest. This was a place where dedicated guilds of builders, artisans, and instrument makers masterfully transformed raw wood into veritable miracles. And it was here that the violin, as we recognize it today, was truly born. At the very center of this quiet revolution stood Andrea Amati, a master luthier whose groundbreaking innovations would come to define an entire family of instruments. Building on the existing lira da braccio and other Renaissance fiddles, Amati ingeniously streamlined the body shape, meticulously refined the arched top and back, and, crucially, standardized the proportions. His creations were not mere experiments. They were definitive templates. He introduced the distinctive F-shaped sound holes, which not only allowed for superior sound projection but also helped stabilize the instrument's delicate structure. His instruments were noticeably smaller, lighter, and far more responsive than anything that had come before. And, most importantly, he tuned them consistently in perfect fifths, a tuning system that gave the violin its uniquely vocal and remarkably agile range. By the mid-1500s, Amati's meticulously crafted violins were being commissioned by royalty, including King Charles IX of France, who famously ordered a set of 24 instruments for his royal court. These were not simply musical tools. They were potent status symbols, often hand-painted and gilded, beautifully blending intricate engineering with visual artistry. Cremona rapidly became the undisputed epicenter of violin-making excellence. Other distinguished families soon followed the Amati tradition, most notably the Guarneri and Stradivari dynasties. They did not just copy Amati's designs. They skillfully refined, stretched, and deepened his profound vision. The violins emerging from Cremona were no longer anonymous workshop items. They were signed works of unparalleled genius, each possessing its own distinctive tone and soul. Why Cremona? Some speculate it was the superior quality of the maple and spruce wood readily available nearby. Others point to the ideal climate, perfectly suited for slowly and evenly drying wood. Still others credit the tight-knit guild culture, where invaluable techniques were meticulously passed down through generations of apprenticeships, and crucial secrets were never written down, always spoken. Whatever the precise reason, Cremona became to violins what Florence was to painting, a true birthplace of artistic brilliance. From these narrow cobblestone streets, an instrument emerged that could whisper with delicate tenderness or weep with profound sorrow, leap with joyful agility or lament with heartbreaking expressiveness. An instrument that would go on to shape centuries of music across Europe and far beyond. By the early 17th century, the violin had decisively outgrown its birthplace. No longer confined solely to the luthier shops of Cremona, it began to travel extensively, from royal court to royal court, from grand chapel to intimate chapel, and across the intricate borders of Renaissance Europe. And with each journey, it steadily gained power, immense prestige, and profound purpose. Italy, of course, remained the vibrant heart of violin culture. Composers like Claudio Monteverdi were among the very first to prominently feature the violin in formal compositions. In Monteverdi's Orfeo, 1607, widely considered the first great opera, violins were used not merely for accompaniment but to powerfully express mood, raw emotion, and divine grandeur. The instrument was no longer a rustic fiddler tool. It was a sophisticated, theatrical voice, capable of nuanced seduction, profound sorrow, and triumphant declaration. Soon, Italian violinists and master instrument makers carried their highly prized craft abroad. They migrated to Germany, Austria, and France, where royal courts eagerly embraced the latest musical fashions. The violin swiftly became a consistent fixture in chamber ensembles, greatly valued for its clarity and brilliant sound. In Paris, the royal court of Louis XIV enthusiastically adopted it. The Sun King even maintained an official 24-member violin band, Les 24 Violons du Roi, a powerful endorsement of the instrument's rapidly rising status. Meanwhile, Germany and Austria began developing their own distinct schools of violin playing and construction. Makers like Jacob Stainer meticulously crafted instruments with a broader, deeper body, favoring a warmer, richer tone over the sharper brilliance characteristic of the Italian designs. Violinists such as Heinrich Bieber pushed the instrument's technical boundaries, composing demanding solo works replete with intricate ornamentation and deep emotional complexity. Churches, too, readily embraced the violin. It accompanied choirs, filled immense stone cathedrals with soaring melodies, and became an integral part of sacred oratorios. No longer considered too sensual or secular, it was now fully accepted into the highest realms of spiritual music. By the end of the 17th century, the violin had become far more than a mere curiosity. It was absolutely essential to composers, to performers, and to discerning audiences alike. It was equally at home in a smoky tavern, a grand royal ball, or a candlelit cathedral, and it was not done yet. Next came the golden age of violin making and the legendary rise of a name that would become eternally synonymous with perfection: Antonio Stradivari. If Andrea Amati gave birth to the violin, Antonio Stradivari perfected it. Born in Cremona in 1644, Stradivari was trained in the respected tradition of the Amati workshop, but he quickly moved beyond mere imitation. What he meticulously created in the late 17th and early 18th centuries would become the undisputed gold standard, not just for violins, but for musical craftsmanship itself. Stradivari's instruments were not just beautiful, they were truly transcendent. With a keen, almost intuitive eye for wood selection, subtle asymmetry, precise shaping, and a still mysterious varnish that added profound depth both visually and sonically, Stradivari violins possessed a tone that was remarkably clear, incredibly powerful, and hauntingly warm. They could effortlessly project to the very back of a large concert hall, yet whisper with intimate tenderness to a single listener. Stradivari built over 1,000 instruments in his lifetime, including violins, violas, cellos, and even guitars. Approximately 650 of these masterpieces survive today, each one named like royalty. The Messiah Soil, the Lady Blunt. Many are still played by the world's greatest soloists centuries later. Their sound remains utterly unmatched. Some scientists have painstakingly tried to unlock the Stradivarius secret by scanning the wood, analyzing the varnish, or meticulously modeling the acoustics, but the truth is, no one can fully replicate what he achieved. What made his work so exceptionally unique? Part of it was undoubtedly the wood. Slow-growing alpine spruce for the top plate and richly flamed maple for the back, all aged to near perfection. But much of it was Stradivari's meticulous, almost imperceptible adjustments, minute alterations to thickness, arching, and shape that gave each instrument its unique, profound character. During his lifetime, Stradivari's fame spread far beyond Cremona. Kings, dukes, and virtuosos eagerly sought his instruments. His workshop became legendary. Even after his death in 1737, musicians regarded a Stradivarius as the ultimate prize, a tool so exquisitely responsive it felt almost alive. Stradivari was not the only great luthier of his time. The Guarneri family, especially Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù, produced violins with darker, more aggressive tones, favored by firebrand soloists like Paganini. But Stradivari's name endured as a true myth, his instruments revered like relics from a divine era of sound making. The golden age of violin making had reached its peak, and from this point forward, the violin would transition from the hands of its legendary makers to the grand stage, ushering in the era of virtuosos who would stretch it and the human spirit to its absolute limits. By the 18th century, the violin had fully evolved from a mere supporting voice into a commanding starring role. It no longer simply filled in harmonies or led dance rhythms. It began to speak, as if it had a unique personality of its own. And in the hands of a new breed of performers, the virtuosos, the violin became an instrument of profound awe. One of the earliest stars was Arcangelo Corelli, whose elegant and expressive sonatas helped define the violin's crucial role in Baroque music. He was not a flashy showman, but his playing was widely admired for its grace and exquisite control. His compositions laid the essential groundwork for generations of future violinists, carefully emphasizing phrasing, tone, and underlying structure. Then came Antonio Vivaldi the Fiery, Red Priest, of Venice, a brilliant composer and captivating performer. Vivaldi wrote over 230 violin concertos, most famously the iconic Four Seasons. These pieces were not just music. They were vivid theatrical experiences, filled with imitations of birdsong, dramatic thunderstorms, and lively pastoral dances. Vivaldi clearly showed the world that the violin could not only sing, but it could tell complex stories. As musical taste shifted toward the classical era, the violin remained at the absolute forefront. Composers like Mozart and Beethoven wrote numerous violin sonatas and concertos that demanded immense nuance, breathtaking speed, and deep emotional intelligence from the performer. The violinist was no longer just a technician. They had to be a storyteller and a dancer, moving seamlessly with the orchestra and breathing life into every single phrase. But it was in the early 19th century that the very idea of the violinist as a mythic figure reached its dramatic peak, thanks to Niccolò Paganini. With his gaunt appearance, seemingly supernatural stage presence, and seemingly impossible technique, Paganini was far more than a mere musician. He was a true phenomenon. Audiences whispered that he had made a pact with the devil. His fingers flew across the strings in dizzying displays of double stops, harmonics, and complex left-hand pizzicato. His 24 caprices for solo violin remain a towering Everest for modern players. Paganini changed everything. After him, violin playing would never be the same. He dramatically elevated the instrument's celebrity and ushered in an age where soloists were revered almost as much as kings. With every bow stroke, the violin was no longer just an instrument. It was a living voice, sometimes divine, sometimes demonic, always utterly unforgettable. As the violin steadily grew in power and prestige throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, it also became the undisputed cornerstone of the orchestra. Once a companion to singers and lutes, the violin now confidently led the charge, melodic, exquisitely expressive, and remarkably versatile. It became the instrument composers universally relied on to carry their grandest musical ideas. The transformation began with the Baroque orchestra, where strings already formed the fundamental foundation. Violin sections, first and second, emerged to provide both harmony and intricate melody. Composers like Bach and Handel gave prominent roles to the violin in their concertos and orchestral suites, but it was still fundamentally part of an ensemble identity. There were no massive string sections yet, just tight, intimate groups. Then came the classical era, and everything dramatically expanded. Composers such as Haydn and Mozart meticulously shaped the modern symphony, and the violin definitively took center stage. Haydn, often called the father of the symphony, built rich, perfectly balanced orchestral textures with violins serving as the primary melodic engine. Mozart went further, giving violins delicate, soaring lines and treating them with remarkable tenderness and agility in his symphonies. The violin could be playful, tragic, or divine, all within a few measures. But it was Beethoven who truly transformed the orchestra. He dramatically expanded its size, deepened its emotional range, and placed unprecedented demands on every section, especially the strings. The first violins frequently carried the primary themes, while the second violins played crucial harmonic and rhythmic roles. No longer mere background players, they were now the eloquent narrators of symphonic drama. By the Romantic era, orchestras had grown significantly in size, and the violin was unequivocally king. Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Dvorak, and others gave the violin lush, expansive melodies and heroic passages, both in symphonies and concertos. The orchestral violinist had to master profound nuance, incredible endurance, and meticulous ensemble coordination, all while keeping pace with rapidly evolving musical complexity. Conductors, too, began relying heavily on the concertmaster, the lead violinist, not just to lead their section but to bridge the crucial gap between conductor and orchestra. In many respects, a concertmaster became second in command, responsible for tuning, bowings, and setting the overall tone for the entire ensemble. From intimate chamber groups to massive 100-piece orchestras, the violin had intricately woven itself into the very DNA of Western art music. It was not just an instrument anymore. It was the expressive voice of the symphony itself. By the 20th century, the violin had long since conquered Europe's grand concert halls, but its remarkable journey was far from complete. No longer confined to the symphony or opera pit, the violin began to boldly cross borders and genres, weaving its distinctive voice into cultures far beyond its original Italian roots. In Eastern Europe, the violin had already taken on a vibrant, expressive role in Romani, Gypsy, music long before it was ever prominently featured in Tchaikovsky or Brahms. In Romani hands, the violin danced, cried, and dazzled with virtuosic flourishes and heartbreaking melodies. It became a voice of both resistance and celebration, passed down through rich oral tradition rather than formal conservatory instruction. Across the Atlantic, the violin transformed again, becoming the fiddle in American folk, Appalachian, and bluegrass music. Here, the violin shed its aristocratic clothing and adopted worn boots. It became a communal instrument, leading lively barn dances and telling intricate stories through reels and jigs. Its style also shifted. Quick, rhythmic bowing, open tunings, and spontaneous improvisation took center stage. In India, the violin found an entirely new identity, expertly adapted into Carnatic and Hindustani classical music. It was played seated, resting on the floor, its scroll angled toward the player's ankle. Indian violinists mastered microtones, intricate slides, and complex ornamentations foreign to Western ears, yet perfectly suited to the nuanced raga and tala. The instrument had successfully crossed a profound cultural bridge and become something uniquely Indian. Meanwhile, in Latin America, the violin flourished in vibrant mariachi bands and diverse folk ensembles. In Argentina, it danced alongside the bandoneon in the smoky world of tango. In Mexico, it serenaded with soaring lines over trumpets and guitars. Everywhere it traveled, the violin adapted, not by dominating, but by keenly listening and seamlessly blending. Jazz propelled the violin yet another step forward. In the 1930s and 40s, players like Stéphane Grappelli transformed the instrument into a swinging, playful lead voice in the hot club of France. Later, Jean-Luc Ponty and Regina Carter redefined the violin for fusion and modern jazz, proving it could groove, bend notes, and improvise with the very best of them. By the 21st century, the violin had truly become a global citizen. It could eloquently speak any musical language: classical, jazz, folk, experimental. Its voice could be lush or raw, precise or wild. And still, through every transformation, it remained unmistakably itself. In today's world, the violin stands at a fascinating crossroads, a timeless instrument in a rapidly changing age. It still firmly holds its throne in orchestras, grand concert halls, and esteemed conservatories. Yet it also thrives robustly in genres and places the old masters could never have possibly imagined. Its voice, haunting, profoundly human, endlessly adaptable, continues to echo across continents and diverse cultures. In classical music, the violin remains absolutely essential. Young prodigies dazzle on global stages, performing concertos composed centuries ago with fresh emotion and breathtaking technical brilliance. International competitions like the Queen Elizabeth or the Menuhin launch careers and keep the classical tradition vibrantly alive and fiercely competitive. But there is a significant shift happening. More players are actively challenging tradition, pushing the very boundaries of what the violin can be. Contemporary composers are writing for the violin in innovative new ways, using extended techniques, electronics, loops, and non-Western tunings. The violin is not just singing anymore. It is scratching, whispering, shrieking, tapping. It can mimic machines, birds, or pure chaos in the hands of boundary pushers like Hilary Hahn, Patricia Kapuscinskaja, and Curtis Stewart. The violin becomes a laboratory of sound. Meanwhile, technology is fundamentally reshaping how we interact with the instrument. Electric violins, once a novelty, are now commonplace in pop, rock, and experimental music. Artists like Lindsey Sterling seamlessly blend choreography, EDM, and cinematic themes into viral violin performances that reach millions online. A powerful reminder that the instrument's appeal is not just sonic. It is visual, emotional, and deeply personal. Education, too, is rapidly evolving. With YouTube tutorials, online masterclasses, and digital sheet music, the violin is more accessible than ever before. A student in Nairobi or Limerick can learn from a Juilliard professor with the mere tap of a screen. But alongside this democratization comes a crucial challenge: how to preserve depth and discipline in a world seemingly obsessed with instant gratification and speed. Still, through all the noise, the violin endures. Why? Because it is, and always has been, a profound extension of the human voice. Cries as we do, it sings as we wish we could. And whether it is played on a creaky stage, a bustling subway platform, or in front of 10 million online subscribers, the violin still possesses the extraordinary power to stop time, if only for a fleeting moment. Delicate yet defiant, ancient yet endlessly evolving, the violin is not just an instrument. It is a living storyteller, and its captivating story is still being written. After the death of Qin Shi Huang and the quick collapse of the Qin dynasty, many of his sweeping reforms were undone. But the wall was not one of them. The Han dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, which followed the Qin, recognized the same timeless truth: China's northern border was never truly safe. And so, rather than abandon the huge project, the Han emperors expanded, strengthened, and redefined the Great Wall. Under Emperor Wu of Han, in particular, the wall became more than just a military barrier. It became the very backbone of imperial strategy. The Han launched massive campaigns to aggressively push back the Xiongnu, the same nomadic horsemen who had relentlessly troubled the north for generations. In doing so, they extended the wall farther than ever before, pushing into regions that would eventually become crucial routes for trade and movement for centuries. The Han did not just rebuild the Qin walls, they cleverly adapted them. Instead of relying only on rammed earth, they used bricks, stones, and more sophisticated fortifications where the land allowed. Watchtowers were strategically added at regular intervals, allowing soldiers to spot raiding parties from a distance and quickly light signal fires. An early warning system that let news of an attack travel hundreds of miles in just a few hours. More than just a military tool, the Han Wall evolved into a complex logistical network. Garrison posts, signal towers, and supply depots turned the wall into a functional military road. Troops could move quickly, supplies could be sent efficiently, and messages could travel with incredible speed by beacon or runner. The Great Wall had become more than just a line. It was now a living, interconnected system of defense. Life along the Han Wall was undeniably harsh, but it was not forgotten by history. The empire stationed thousands of soldiers and settlers in remote forts, creating a frontier society where families, merchants, and outposts relied on imperial protection. Over time, these lonely stations grew into small communities, and in their shadows, cultures met. Han Chinese and nomadic tribes traded, mingled, and occasionally fought in these dusty crossroads. By the end of the Han era, the wall had transformed into something entirely new. Not just a line of defense, but a powerful symbol of imperial presence in the vast northern lands. And yet, even the mighty Han could not hold the line forever. Next came chaos, collapse, and eventually, a new dynasty with a bold new style of wall building. With the fall of the Han dynasty in 220 CE, China once again broke apart into widespread political disunity and conflict. What had been a powerful, centralized empire split into rival kingdoms during the Three Kingdoms period, followed by centuries of deep instability. And as the emperors fell, so did the strategic importance of the Great Wall. Many long stretches of the Han and Qin walls crumbled into dust. Neglect, erosion, and looting took their toll. Station outposts were abandoned, watchtowers collapsed, and in many areas, the wall became less a physical structure and more a buried memory, half swallowed by shifting sands and creeping vines. Without a strong central government to maintain it, the Great Wall was simply too vast to preserve. But the threats from the north never truly went away. Nomadic powers like the Xianbei, the Rouran, and later the Gokturks rose and expanded across the steppes. Some of these groups would eventually create their own kingdoms within China, blending cultures while redrawing borders. The wall in these turbulent times was less a hard, impenetrable border and more a fragmented relic of an older vision of defense, a line that no longer matched the complex political reality. Yet, pieces of the wall still served local rulers. Some warlords and regional dynasties used leftover segments of the ancient defenses as the basis for new fortifications. Others mined the old walls for materials. Bricks and stones were repurposed to build homes, temples, or their own regional walls. It was a slow, deliberate dismantling of a fallen empire's bones. Meanwhile, in the popular imagination, the wall faded. It was no longer an empire-wide project, but a thing of legends and old records. Chinese poets wrote of distant battlegrounds and lonely border fortresses, painting the northern frontier as a cold, bitter place where men went to die and were rarely remembered. Still, even in this era of decay, the fundamental idea of the wall remained powerful. It lingered as a potent symbol of what China had once been and what it could be again. A dream of unity, strength, and clarity in the face of widespread chaos. And that dream would stir once more, when a new dynasty, born from military conquest and fueled by ambition, rose powerfully from the ashes. The Ming. But first, centuries more would pass. By the time the Ming dynasty came to power in 1368, China had endured centuries of invasion, collapse, and foreign rule. The trauma of the Yuan dynasty, which had been governed by the Mongols, was still fresh in the collective memory. When the Ming successfully overthrew them, it was not just a political victory. It was a profound cultural turning point. And with that came an urgent, unwavering priority. Never again. The Ming emperors recognized the immediate need for a strong, fortified northern barrier, not as a mere symbolic gesture, but as a completely practical necessity. And unlike the earthen walls of the Qin or the scattered garrisons of the Han, the Ming Wall would be something entirely different. Solid stone, durable brick, and integrated firepower. Construction began in earnest in the late 1400s and dramatically increased in the 1500s, especially under the skilled direction of generals like Qi Jiguang, who saw the wall not only as a defense against persistent Mongol raids but as a powerful way of projecting Ming control. This was a dynasty that desired permanence, and it clearly showed in their construction. They built with carefully quarried stone and kiln-fired bricks. The walls were heavily reinforced, intricate drainage systems were added, and watchtowers rose at regular intervals. Beacons were installed to send smoke signals by day and blazing flames at night.